All right, we are back to talk, and I'm here still. I decided to still be here. We took a real break. We actually went and food happened, and people saw their families and got to hang out, and now we're back to talk about The Last of Us 2. There's no subtitle, right? It's just called The Last of Us 2?
Last of Us Part 2.
Part 2. Apologies.
That's how you know it's prestigious, because it's not a 2, it's a Part 2.
Yeah, you're right. That is the signal. Is it prestigious? I haven't played this game. Rob, Patrick, both of you have played most of it, some of it, all of it. Rob, I know you're writing a review.
Rob, you probably finished it. I've played like 12 hours.
And then Cado, like me.
Oh, you are but a babe.
I know.
Is it really long? Is it a long one?
It will shock you how much The Last of Us there is in The Last of Us 2.
How much there is to last? How much to last us, the gamers, when you play The Last of Us?
Peggy, you will be amazed how much this absolutely happened. So wait, so is it like we're talking like dozens of hours of being
like
in this
30,
game?
35?
I think
40?
I broke 30.
Okay.
Now, mind you, I tend to play these games pretty leisurely because I love to loot locations completely bare.
You love to play a game like me where if like a normal person wouldn't max out everything in their inventory they can collect until about 6 hours in, and instead 2 hours into the game, all the bullets, all of the crafting ingredients, don't need to collect anything anymore because I got it all. We're good.
Yeah, basically like, oh, what's that? A house full of zombies? I'm gonna fuck them up. Zombies ain't shit.
So let's talk about big picture here. I know that there's some stuff that's off that we can't talk about. I don't know what that stuff is. I haven't read the embargo because I'm not reviewing this game or playing this game. But my understanding is there's some stuff we can't get into.
The embargo. I mean, Sony with their narrative games always has pretty specific embargoes. This one is less specific in as much as just says, hey, don't talk about the story, which is tough for a narrative-based game. Like one of the how to talk there. There is an event that sets things into motion in The Last of Us Part 2.
This is easily talked around, but it's just annoying that you have to. Right. This is a revenge story. Right. You can't discuss what precipitates that revenge is required. But everything hinges on a transgression that sets all this in motion. And like the game revisits that theme constantly throughout its length. So again, like the embargo restrictions make it really difficult to like, this isn't don't reveal that Rosebud's the sled. This is not that. This is like, hey, don't reveal that the man who dies at the start is Charles Foster Kane. Don't make clear this is about a newspaper man.
Don't explain the origins of a Spider-Man villain that is famous across the history of the Spider-Man.
Oh my God. Let's just say, we must have talked about the eight-armed character, a Spider-Man character, and the restriction of not being allowed to talk about that character, right? During Spider-Man?
You were like, and when I reviewed Spider-Man, one of the bits was, it must have been specific. Maybe it was specific in the embargo agreement. It was like, don't explain that Dr. Octavius turns into Dr. Octopus. And so I tried to get around that. Like I had some line. You were
complimenting it specifically. You were saying,
I think
despite the fact that this is a well-tread story.
Yeah, like it was like, oh, they found inventive ways to deal with like the relationship with Peter Parker, and I don't. But like they came back and were like very upset. Like, do not spoil this. Like, what do you mean spoiling like a main central arc of like the Dr. Octavius from like every Spider-Man story ever?
Superman's from where?
Man, I really like this Thomas and Martha Wayne couple. I wonder what happens to them.
They seem like great parents. I'm sure it's going to go great for that kid. Oh, anyway, so I mean, I guess it's worth saying at this point that means that there are certain things that you can't talk about without risking burning a bridge with Sony indefinitely. Do you, and that we can revisit in the future. It's not that we can never talk about them. It means
the embargo's lifting a week before the game comes out. It's a long game. This is something we'll revisit when we can, take all the gloves off.
So how about this question about the precipitating event of this revenge story? Do you feel good about it? Is it an interesting and earned moment? Is it something that makes you feel like what follows is something that you're invested in, or what?
Well, I think it's entirely predictable, and that's not necessarily even a slight. Like, it's just if you're going to tell this kind of story, there's really only a couple of ways it can go to sort of like incite a certain reaction from the main character. I don't know.
I think for me, I think one of the real issues with this game is that at the beginning, I think not necessarily the moment feels earned. I think this is a very manipulative game in a whole host of ways. And I feel like a lot of its big moments are telegraphed, and they are very much about producing like a really specific reaction, and they're carried out well. But in terms of like, does the moment land? Does it justify or explain what happens? What it sets in motion? Sort of. But I think one of the other issues with this game is that it's always a big part of this game is asking you to reconsider that moment and reconsider what people have chosen to do in reaction to that, what people have chosen to do in the name of revenge. But I think the really frustrating thing is it goes in this direction of, hey, did you know like revenge might be bad? Like, did you know that like in the act of getting payback,
come on, no way.
Yeah, like more, you could actually, you might even become the thing you hate. And
it's also about like for people who, even the people who are most intimately in our lives, like what we don't know about that person, and the secrets you keep from one another. This game, one of the things that happens at the end of The Last of Us, the first game is, Ellie is not informed about the fact that she could have saved humanity, right? Like that's like one of the, I haven't replayed that game, but like that's one of the, part of the moral quandaries of the end of The Last of Us is, would she have made the decision to sacrifice herself if she'd known that she could have put her life on an operating table and stopped all of this, what was happening in the world in terms of the viral infection. And like that is, a part of what is playing out in The Last of Us is, that is not just, a secret Joel kept from Ellie, that is something that, all characters, all people keep from one another. And this game tries to, flip the script on that a bit.
How much of the game then is, so I think about The Last of Us 1, and it felt a little bit like these long cinematic segments bookended a much larger gameplay segment where you are scavenging, fighting, sneaking, lowering things for someone to climb onto, or raising something for someone else to climb onto, unlocking doors, etc. And that it would be like, here's my 45-minute gameplay segment, and then on either side of it was like, hey, and here's the 20 minutes of high-resolution cutscene. Is that basically the model still?
Oh, man. Emmanuel.
So, but the thing is, Rob, the game is actually deceptive in thinking that it's going to go slightly differently early on. So there's a sequence early when you first arrive in Seattle. So this game has a lot of co-directors and co-designers like on the higher chain, but I believe his name is Josh Schreier, who was one of the leads on Uncharted. What was the like mini one that they did?
Lost Legacy?
Lost Legacy.
No, wait, no. Is that right?
I think that's right.
Okay.
Is the two two women co-leading the game?
Legacy. Yes.
Yeah. And part of what was different about that game was that you were in like a big hub area. And so, yes, you were getting kind of funneled into little areas, but there was a lot of discovery to that. You were like, here is a big open space, like go start exploring. And it felt much more naturalistic because you were in this wider space. And Last of Us 2 does that. Part 2, excuse me, does that early on, where there's a sequence where you're on a horse, you're in this giant open part of Seattle, and you kind of know where you're supposed to go next, but it's very clear, hey, you're supposed to start poking around, and there's like, you get a map, and there are all these different, you start marking the map with question marks and like exploring these different areas, and I found that to be like really satisfying. And on some level, it's not all that different than the loop you're describing, Austin, of like gameplay section, cutscene, gameplay section, cutscene. But just the way it's contextualized and the sense that you're discovering things at a different pace and more leisurely, as opposed to just being funneled through what often happens is you're funneled forward and then there's just kind of like a building to your left and a building to your right. And the illusion of openness is produced through like the really high resolution assets and the realism of the world surrounding. But this opening sequence early on in the game, I found to be really satisfying. And I haven't had really another one of those in like,
and you won't
8 hours. And man, that sucks.
The idea, there are 2 zones that you explore, basically 2 different like neighborhoods in Seattle, I want to say. And then they shit can it completely. And the hallway might widen at points, like, hey, that is a building I can go over there and see if there's loot in there. And it's not, I don't have to go through that building, I can just go explore it. But that's about as far as it goes.
Because like in this sequence, you're on a horse, you need the horse because it's big enough that it would be annoying to traverse on foot. There are like one of the best secrets like involves you like sneaking along a highway, like throwing a rope down, like swinging out. Like I found I was like having like genuine discoveries, even though it was clearly funneling me to all of these places. But it found a way to break some of that linearity that is so tied to a lot of Naughty Dog's games. And that's what I thought. As soon as I encountered that sequence, I was like, okay, I hope there's like 3 or 4 of these throughout the game, because even if it's me experiencing those same little micro rooms that define Uncharted, Last of Us, even just dropping it in this way was more satisfying. So it's disappointing to hear that that's not most of the game.
Yeah,
go ahead, Rob.
No, I think this is so there's 2 things. One, just in a word, Emmanuel asked me the other day, in one word, describe The Last of Us 2, and after I thought about it for a moment, the answer is more. In terms of how this game feels, it's the same game. There's just more of it now. Like in terms of vibe, in terms of what you do, you've seen all of this before, and not just in The Last of Us. Like there is so much of the Naughty Dog house style throughout this game. And it really begins to, I think, drag the game down, because so many of the beats are not just telegraphed if you know not only The Last of Us, but the other Uncharted games, like how these things tend to work, but also just how often they were repeated just over the length of this one game. And so, like, the sheer number of jump scares you'll have as you like squeeze through a narrow passageway. Everything seems quiet, but like now I have to get into this room. Right. What's going to happen as I enter? Probably something bad. I need to jump onto this thing. It looks a little rickety. If you think there might be a cutscene where like the thing collapses and you end up in a really inconvenient part of the level, you're absolutely correct. And so it's really kind of a bummer insofar as I think I was with you, Patrick. Like there was a minute there where I was thinking like, okay, yeah, like a little more world exploration, like a little more wandering around the setting and not just exploring like the main quest, but just the entire backdrop that surrounds it. That just isn't this game.
And just the notion that like I might miss things, right?
Yeah,
like there's something about setting up a world and, and expecting the player, if they're really detailed, but like it's like an interesting setting where you're coming in, where you're learning about Seattle and like how like the sort of like the fascist sort of like breakdown that was occurring like in this part of the, I mean, it was actually really, I was more interested in the world building that was occurring than actually like the quest I was on. And I think that's useful in like was useful for the kind of story it was telling, and it just I guess they abandoned that.
It's
pretty quickly.
It's interesting to go back to what Rob was just saying about if you see something, you will expect what is in front of you. You will expect to be jump scared after you go through the tiny hallway, or for the scaffolding under you to fall apart or whatever. I think a lot about games and immaterial technologies. Like, we think about game technology being ray tracing or sweat tracing, if you will, or other types of, this is a fast hard drive or whatever. But there are in the world lots of immaterial technologies that are like writing as a technology, right? Certain styles of grammar are technologies. And what The Last of Us 1 did for a lot of people was introduce them to two new kind of game design technologies around things like resource management, certain styles of combat, even certain styles of stealth and stealth management around the way resources played out when you got caught. And then it's been many years since Last of Us 1 came out, and those technologies were spread across the entirety of games, right? Like, you think about something like Last of Us 1 had the consumable instant kill when you get caught by a zombie thing, right? And now that's Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes both had a system for that too. This becomes like a pretty standardized thing in the world of survival horror games. And Last of Us 1 already had some issues around just like, it's a shooting gallery sometimes. Like, sometimes it's just old shit. So I'm curious if there is new shit on top of the kind of stuff that you're saying is old hat at this point. Like, are there encounters or sequences where you get that feeling of like, oh wow, this is besides the horse in the beginning of the game, which sounds like you don't come back to open spaces again, were there moments where you're like, hey, this is genuinely, like, maybe not groundbreaking, but feels new, this feels fresh?
I for some reason did not play Left Behind, the DLC for the original. So I played that like 2 weeks ago. It's short. It's like 90 minutes, 2 hours. It's worth playing because it's like 90% story, like 10% combat. But one of the things that's introduced in Left Behind is I didn't realize this wasn't in the original, was the notion of sort of the infected and human soldiers being in scenarios at the same time. In The Last of Us, it's pretty much those are divided sort of sequences. Right. And Left Behind, it's introduced the idea of how can you use the infected as a tool that is more than just your bombs and your bullets, and that's played with like a couple of times in the 10 or so 12 hours that I've played in part 2. Not enough to like make it like feel fundamentally different, but I mean it is satisfying during the couple of sequences to like have a well placed bottle and then just watch everyone lose their shit. But it's not. I don't know. There's not an additional strategic layer. Like
right.
There are often times where coming into a combat scenario, I don't have tools to like set up the sequence in a way that like I'm going to see how A, B, and C plays out. Like setting certain traps or anything like that. I don't know, Rob, you could illuminate if there's more of that further in the game. But like for example, you get access to sort of like a trip mine, but you can't throw it. You have to set it right in front of you. And this is a game where the moment you get within like breathing distance of something, whether it's a human or an infected, like you're screwed. Like then like stealth is over, like active combat's beginning. And so there were lots of times where I'd survey what was in front of me. I was like, wow, I wish I had tools to try and do a couple of things before active combat takes over. And really all you have is to stealth knife enemies, and eventually you can get access to like a silencer that you can put on your pistol, so that you have some options there, but less than I would have hoped, at least through the period of the game that I'm in so far.
I think like things that are new to this game, but don't feel particularly new to me. You can go prone, and there's lots of tall grass, and so a big part of this game is like you can just hit the deck when someone has eyes on, and a lot of times there's like going to be a tuft of tall grass that you can duck into. You can sort of slither around like a snake and wait for somebody to pass by and spring up and knife them.
See that knife sequence for the 600th time?
Oh, yeah, a lot of repeated death kill animation?
Well, because 90% of your kills are a knife.
Like 18 times, 20 times, yeah.
Wait, you joked out the same person? I thought they all had unique names.
Same character model. Yeah, no, well,
that stuff
more than others.
That stuff that had been...
Speaking to that, because I don't want to forget this, is that, one of the talking points on this game has been, we've given like unique names to the different enemies that you're fighting, and they're going to, bark out those names when they're missing, and that's supposed to like emotionally ground, the 800th soldier that the 800th Garrett that you've taken down is finally going to take a toll on you. But there was a sequence where I just gotten access to these trip mines, and when you get a new tool, the game will will usually set up a scenario where it's like, hey, you should probably use it here and see how it works, and then that'll set you up for future encounters. And so I walked into that area and I was like, oh, the game clearly wants me to like set this up, walk away. They're going to always go down this one path so I can see what happens. And so I set the trip mine down. I go around the corner and they come through. And this trip mine doesn't just like send them flying. Like you see chunks of their flesh. Yeah. Like it is horrifying. And there is no reaction from Ellie, just nothing, like just zilch. Like this explosion happens 2 feet from me, and just no elevated breathing, no comment on, not like a holy shit. It's just wow, those people blew up. Time to move on to the. I think I saw Garrett over down the field. I think I need to go get him.
2 things. One, the most reliable use case I found for the trip mine was when I was bugging out, I was just like, oh shit, I'm running. And there's like 50, like there's a train of zombies behind me. Just fling it at my feet. And the thing is, like, usually you will have just enough distance that, like, will you get a little splash damage? Absolutely. Will it be way more efficient than trying to dodge around and, like, work your way out of this? Hell yes. Like, you're just like, oh no, I really fucked this up badly. Bleep. It's like the banana peel in Mario Kart, where it just like wipes out the entire pack behind you. But the other thing that I cannot stress enough, and this is reflected in every layer of the game. This game is fucking gory. Like Last of Us 1 was grim and dark. This one, early on, one of the first thoughts I had was, man, that is a really ridiculously detailed exit wound. And then later, a thought I had was, wow, that is a hell of a skull crushing animation.
God.
And I saw multiple, like, if you want a game where you really have time to meditate on like facial exit wounds, boy, does The Last of Us like set the bar high. Sometimes it'll just surprise you. Like you'll like hip fire your hunting rifle at somebody and shoot them in the leg, which is usually not an amazing shot, but sometimes it rips their fucking leg off and they start crawling around the grass like screaming.
What's the emotional effect there for you when that happens? Is it like, what is it?
None.
After a point, I started to get exhausted of it. Like,
well, I guess that's what I mean. I guess that's what I mean. Like, it doesn't. Like the effect is probably to make you horrified or like I don't know. Am I supposed to shoot him in the hand instead? It's like the game gives me a friendlier option to deal with the encounters. It's all just death.
But it's just it does such a like it is just unrelentingly bleak. And I will say this: one of the things this game is going to do is as you go through your revenge quest, at some point in the story, it's going to want to like it will sort of flip things around so that you begin to understand a little bit more about the context behind the people you're hunting. And that will retroactively inform a lot of what you've seen and done and be like, oh shit, that person did have a name. Oh shit, that dog was somebody's dog. At that point, it does have an emotional effect, but it's also just, again, it's a very manipulative one. But I think also there's just an element of they serve this tone in such large quantities that it does begin to have an emotional effect. And the emotional effect, like by probably halfway through this game, was I think everyone in the story would have been better off if all the main characters just fucking died. Like,
Fuck them all.
Like, this game turned me against Ellie at a certain point where I was just like, okay, we need to call time on this. This sucks. And it is clear, like, even the narrative, this has become a ridiculously self-destructive quest. And the game makes that point, and then it's like, all right, we're only at 50%. Not in terms of length, but like intensity. Right. Now we're going to really crank it up till it's just unfucking bearable.
It's so easy for me to anticipate the response to what you've just said, which is like, yeah, dude, that's the point, right? Like, yeah, dude, like it's supposed to be dark and it's supposed to be about how just like in the first one, you came to not trust Joel. Maybe you don't trust Ellie this time, and cycles of violence and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Is your feeling? I know you're trying to take a sip. You go ahead and take a sip. I'll keep
No, I'm just gesturing like contemptuously with a whiskey glass.
That is what you're doing. But like, you know that that's coming, right? You know that the read here is going to be in the first game. By the end of it, you were supposed to not like Joel very much, and here it is years later, and maybe by the end of this one, you're going to see that Ellie is also caught in the same cycles of violence and blah blah blah, which is not, you know, my personal read.
Yeah.
But I'm curious how you think about that read, and whether or not you think that that's a fair or a
I mean, I think that is correct. Like, this is clearly a game that wants to elicit that feeling. It is clearly a game that wants to repel you from characters that you previously liked. It is a game that wants you to question their perspective and whether or not there's any, like, you know, heroism to what they're doing. But at the same time, these are not interesting points. They're certainly not interesting points to make and repeat for like 30 hours. Like, right. That's the thing. Is like, I suppose if this were the first piece of media where these thoughts had occurred to me, I would be floored by the achievement here. But instead, this is a piece of media where like probably 6-8 hours in, you're like, okay, I think I know where this is going. And you do. Like, you 100% do. Like, by the time I had sort of chased down the first couple people that, I was hunting, I could have basically drawn you a map for where the story was going. And by and large, I was correct. If you've seen any number of revenge movies or revenge westerns,
some of which you like,
all of this,
many of which you like. In fact, the fact that you like them is maybe part of why you're able to read this so well.
Rob and I both generally liked The Last of Us as well. Right. Like, I really enjoyed my time with that game. Like, flawed, not arguing it. I agree with a lot of the criticism of that game, but like, it was a game that I, on the whole, enjoyed and was curious to see where they would take that going forward.
Right.
Oh, let me throw the car in reverse here for a second, too.
Please.
Mm-hmm.
The Last of Us. I think the Joel, like by the end, like Joel's the monster, Joel's the villain. I thought at the time, and now I'm pretty confident in it, that take was overstated. Both just in its general like critique of the game, but also in how much the text of the game actually supported that reading. I think The Last of Us is really boilerplate zombie fiction in some ways. Mm-hmm. And I think while Joel was like kind of a textbook case of like, when we talk about toxic masculinity and like violent patriarchy, he's a character that can be used to illustrate those very, very well. But in terms of what the text of the game suggests, I don't think it's as black and white that he is the villain by the end. I think a lot of what they do with Joel is they set up why he would do what he does by the end. And it's not just born by grief, but the end of The Last of Us is he basically refuses to let the Fireflies sacrifice Ellie, even though theoretically it's going to provide the salvation of mankind. But throughout the entire game, we've seen again and again that like everybody thought they were going to be the salvation of mankind, and they were all full of shit. like they were all sort of self-seeking assholes.
Right. Either they were actually abusive, or they were too optimistic about what they had and the settlement that they've been building, or
the
whatever.
Fireflies are a disgraced revolutionary movement that is on its last throw of the dice, right? Like they have basically, their movement has failed for a variety of reasons, and Ellie and the Cure is not just a good for mankind that they can give, it is also kind of their way back.
Right.
And so to me, it was never quite open and shut that like, oh, well, what Joel did is completely monstrous. Everything that the story does is inform you why someone like Joel might at that moment flinch and say, I'm not just going to let you vivisect a child. And
also I'm not going to let her have a say in it. Right, this was always
nobody was going to let her have a say in it.
Right.
Like yes, Ellie was like in the first game, Ellie there was a vibe that she kind of knew that it just didn't make sense that she could be experimented on and like not have that kill her, right? Like she kind of has a feeling that when Joel talks about the future, she ain't got one. She kind of has that feeling, but she doesn't know.
Right.
But
when he does the violence in the name of her, it is not so that she can make an informed decision. He doesn't break that into that hospital room and say, now wait a second, you wake her up and show her the form and make her sign on the dotted line. Like that. But
the Fireflies don't give that option. They're like,
yeah, I know, but he doesn't demand it either. Do you know? Like, I know,
but yeah.
Regardless, I think you're right to say that reading does not hold to the degree that I think it was popularized at the time, partially because I think a lot of people were like, I'm not happy with this ending, but I really liked my time with this thing. What is the read that lets me settle those two things together? And also, frankly, at the time, I realized pretty quickly from talking to people who were not in my immediate circles, when people say things like, I wish Joel was my dad, I was like, oh, this game, the language, the text doesn't, the text is multifarious. Like the text has a bunch of different readings in it. And for you, Joel comes across like this really good dad figure and not like someone who is filled with toxic masculinity. And that is, it has struck me as the years have passed that maybe you're right, that this is supposed to be about a story about someone who decides against all odds to, protect the soul of one child instead of saving the world. And that is like a true thing about the moral of that story in some ways. Regardless, I think where are you going with that coming back now into this one? Do you see that the way those actions happened are now reframed or not reframed or just echoed?
It will stun you. to channel Todd Draper here.
Yeah, again.
It will shock you how much the ending of The Last of Us never happened.
Right. Okay. Great.
Even though
the whole ending or just the little the little moment
the choices made at the end.
Okay.
And the ending conversation, right? I always read that as she knows he's lying.
Me too.
Like she chooses 100%. To go along, but like the way she says okay.
Yeah.
It is that moment when you realize you can't trust your parent.
Yes. And
this is the other reason like why that fucking game worked. The performances were tremendous in that game, right?
Especially
Ashley Johnson
her
and Troy Baker.
She really sells, especially like I think part of the reason people continue to argue over that final moment is because of her specific saying of the word okay.
She injects it with an ambivalence that is real and that allows you to fill in the gaps the way you build up a reason, you build up a read.
So you might think, like, I certainly went into this thinking, okay, that moment, like, if you're going to continue the story with these characters, a lot of it's going to be about the fallout in their relationship. That does not come up as much as you might think. Like, it does. It becomes a thing that is revisited throughout the game in various ways. But it is surprising how much the game just kind of walks back Ellie's awareness.
Also, given it's also surprising from the sense that was also the conversation around the game and has continued to be what has kept that game in sort of like the public consciousness in terms of like when people bring up and want to debate the game, it's about that. It is about that moment. It's about that choice. It's about that ending. It's about your readings of that ending. And that's it's surprising that that's also doesn't become the crux of, or at least some like major crux of, you know, the through line for the sequel.
Yeah, I don't think the thing is like the deception becomes a major like plot point throughout the game, but how it would change the relationship dynamic, it doesn't really follow through all the like knock-on consequences there would be. Instead, it kind of keeps resetting to a point where like, does Ellie know what
They're
what
besties
happened?
again.
Yeah, there's a bit of that.
There's no tension. There's no. It just sounds just you're you're getting excerpts of a father-daughter relationship where actually everything's great and there's never been a problem.
I did a double take where I was like, wait, like now we're having this, this happy, just Joel and Ellie having adventures again.
Some of those sequences are fucking great.
That shit's great, yeah.
Yeah. I just in the vaguest possible terms, like a spaceship, like my God, like an incredible sequence.
But yeah, so I think it doesn't really have a lot of stomach for exploring all the like emotional complexity that will stem from the end of that game. And I think one of the things it does, in addition to sort of changing the context you have for a lot of the actions you take throughout The Last of Us 2, it also, once you get really invested in some other conflicts that are completely external to everything else you've seen in The Last of Us 1 and that has to do with Ellie. Like, we remember that brutal E3 trailer where like somebody's just getting fucking like hammer on bone.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
And it's no characters we recognize.
Yeah.
There's a good reason for that. It has nothing to do with the main characters that we recognize. Like, by the time that sequence appears in the game, yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, it's tense. But at the same time, we are now, like, at this point, we're just exploring other parts of the setting, which is fine, but it's not terribly... Again, it's more...
Well, it sounds like maybe you're articulating that the game is desperate to hold on to Joel and Ellie, but wants to explore parts of this world in which it then has to force those characters into those parts of this world, and maybe it would have been better served. Look, you want to make a Last of Us Part 2, then, do something with a different set of characters that can better ground them emotionally in like those specific circumstances. Whereas maybe sometimes this game is coming across as like, well, I want to see Seattle. Like, how do we get them to Seattle and see some of these other factions that exist across, as opposed to it feeling naturalistic that you'd get there.
Which is a difficult thing, I think, because one of the things you're hitting at here is so much of what the conversation around that game is about just those two characters, those relationships. But even in that first game, there was a lot of post-apocalyptic anthology work there. It's a lot of, now we're in this town, what's the little micro post-apocalyptic story here? Who's here? What are their relationships?
Rob, this game opens with a bunch of that shit and then just leaves that place behind. Like, I would have wouldn't you have loved? I would have played a 30-hour game that takes place in the opening area of this game and explored what is it like to be. I guess you start in a town. You start in a town, like a functional city.
Right. Okay.
And things are good there because Edison bulbs are strung on every single surface. Warm light. That's the Last of Us. That's the Last of Us love language.
Right. And an acoustic guitar. I'm guessing about the acoustic guitar. I don't know if that's actually.
But like, there is commerce. There are restaurants. There like a society has sprung up here that is more than just often what you see in like apocalyptic fiction, in which is like just a barely strung together town that's gonna fall apart the moment whatever the external threat is comes. Like, this is a place that feels fortified. It feels sturdy. It feels like it's not going anywhere, even if somebody dies when they're going out on a patrol.
Right.
And I found that to be like really fascinating. And the further I got from that area, the more I thought, boy, I would have preferred some sort of story that was far more centered in the politics of this town and what it is like to run it, because you can imagine a lot of interpersonal drama that would occur just as the result of this external world, like the world that you're in, and the pressures that would put on trying to because there's also politics, right? There's like a mayor, right? Like the one of the first main characters you come across is one of them, and would have loved to spend more time with her.
Well, and you learn. I think one of the cool things you learn about is it's easy to assume, oh, Joel and Ellie have to be the most interesting people in this town. Like, think of all the things they went through. No, actually, like opening of the game,
nobody gives a shit.
Yeah, it turns out like, oh man, like no girl in Ellie's age cohort could be anywhere near as much of a badass. And then you learn like somebody else is like, yeah, I was killing dudes by the time I was 10. There was some bad stuff. I got caught up in some bad stuff. And I'm like, what? Ellie was like, that wasn't her. You learn about some like old timer who had this completely other like secret life that nobody knew about.
Great. The reveal of that is amazing.
Right. No, like, and I think more of that anthology work would have done well. Not just, and I mean that not just in the like the Pittsburgh sequence in The Last of Us, I think is your quintessential like what works about that game, but also how boilerplate it is. Yeah, right. Totally. Like, oh, you meet a brother, like two brothers, older and younger, and you become fast friends, and you really like get through a lot of shit together, and then oh no, one of them got bit, right? And he turns, and it ends with both of them, both the brothers getting killed. Also, one of the very few, like maybe only black characters. The only black characters
in that game. Riley is black, right? In Left Behind, is that right?
Yeah.
Is that her name?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, like, that beat works well in The Last of Us 1, but also it's like I've seen this in every zombie movie. Like this, like I've seen this scene so many times. The Last of Us 2, I think, does have kind of a cool. Okay, as a work of zombie fiction, I really like is World War Z. Because one is it's really interested in like infrastructure and systems. Like that is what that book is about, is like, hey, how does the late 90s neoliberal order collapse? And like the zombies are like kind of the cause, but like not really. Like that entire book is about all the systems that are going to collapse, but also about where resilience happened and how society is moving on. Like the entire backdrop of that book is society is being rebuilt along different lines in different places, but by and large, like the world didn't end, and now it's rebuilding, and and people are just recovering from that. The Last of Us, I think, in the opening zone gestures toward that, where it's like, hey, you're in a place where the end of the world is history, and now there's a new world being built, and then it leaves all that behind to go back to, and I mean like visually, this game is like indistinguishable. Like you go into the city and everything looks the exact same. It's like, it's just all like mildewed, dank, like rotting concrete interiors, crumbling floorboards, mildewed wallpaper.
It's like rare, like you go into a church once very briefly, and like that's like okay, at least aesthetically, this looks like a tiny bit different.
Yeah.
But otherwise, you're spending a lot of time like flicking on your flashlight and looking at concrete and waiting for an icon to glow so you can get some tape that you don't need. Well, better build really another bomb so I can pick up that tape.
All that just briefly, all that crafting stuff is basically similar to the same as it was.
Totally.
Yeah.
Likewise, the combat
the
stuff basically outside
combat's
of
pretty much
hiding
the same.
in the grass.
They've they've tweaked the melee, like so there's not like a 1 or 2 time or 3 time use 1-hit kill. It's like anytime you go up behind, you have the stealth kills, and then you also have melee weapons that can like stun an enemy and then allow you to 1-hit kill them. So it's like if like a basic infected, you can hit them with a bat. And
but I would not say melee combat is Naughty Dog's strength. Like
no, you just spam this. I mean, well, that's always so that was part of the reason that I fell for The Last of Us as much as they did, is that I've played all the Uncharted games and don't particularly like them, but at various like enjoy a lot of the spectacle. Like I get just enough out of the cinematic flair that I keep coming back to them, despite in the moment-to-moment combat being like, I am not enjoying any of the main part of this game, which is shooting people. But I really liked the combat of Last of Us because it's really slow. It has as we've mentioned multiple times before, as Dia, in reviewing, was it Shadow of the Tomb Raider? Your stealth is only as good as, the combat that occurs after it. I think Last of Us does a really good job of having really satisfying stealth, and the moment it breaks, having really satisfying frenetic combat. Like you can get out of those situations. Like you can truly fuck it up early, but it's fun to roll with it, and you have options. And The Last of Us, even though it presents as a stealth game where you should be really cautious, it's also a game that really rewards, and this is true of the original and the new one, really rewards you being aggressive. Yeah. Wants you to kind of get in there, think of 3 things you want to accomplish very quickly and do those things and then see what results of that. And that can be really satisfying where you throw a bottle, you get a couple of infected over there, you throw a Molotov cocktail, you put down a timed mine in front of you because once they're on fire, they're going to be coming after you. And then at that point, you've already snuck off around the corner and then you're sniping them off. I do enjoy that. Yeah. It works for me. Yeah. It works really well, and it still works in this one. It's repetitive. There's too much of it, but there are enough moments where you come out of a sequence and you're like, fuck yeah, yes, that.
And when you get the full suite of tools too, even by the end of the game, when I was starting to really get towards the I'm not sure I like this anymore. I think the best thing to do would be for my character just get in the fucking sea. Even when I was at that point, there were a few moments where you hit a patrol and these guys are they're just huge assholes. Mm-hmm. And there was one battle where I love games that make you feel like you're the goddamn predator. Uh-huh. And this game, when you are fully kitted out, you feel like the predator, right? Where you have so many different ways to just fuck with people. Different silent weapons, different sorts of traps you can set up. You've stealthed around so much that you even know the map better than the AI does at this point, and so you just turn it against them. When that all comes together, it's pretty fucking good, and you don't even care when you go loud because you can also just get back into stealth, and so you will just sort of come out of the shadows, shoot somebody, and then ghost again. It's very cool.
Even I, who is probably the weakest on Last of Us 1, Last of Us Part 1, I guess now retroactively, loved a lot of the combat stuff. I've never felt as me, I love it when a plan falls apart. I just love it in that moment of oh, I have a good idea, and then you get 2/3 of the idea down, and then that third part happens. You're oh shit, this did not go as planned. I gotta quickly come up with something. That game was so good at that, and that is the only thing that's keeping me curious about this game and whether or not I should play it is because the highlights of that first game, especially playing on whatever the second to highest difficulty was. I remember there was 4 difficulty options maybe or something.
You can change this one. I don't know what you can do in the first one. Yeah. And actually I do want to, in highlighting this, that there's a couple of really smart UI things that this game does that I wish more games would pick up on. So one, you can change the difficulty in real time. And I'm pretty close at this point to ratcheting it up 1 because I'm with you. I want these encounters to be a little harsher on me at this point.
And I want to be punished for playing.
Yeah, and especially I'm 10 hours in. I was cool. I have a lay of the land mechanically. Right. Now I just need the game to push back on me a little more when I get into these different sequences. Otherwise, I'm going to steamroll my way through, and I'll still have a couple of times where it'll feel good, but I'm going to have more of them if the game is kicking my ass a little bit more. But so really smart thing this game does is the moment the game is you can do manual saves, but it's saving. It's both doing hard saves constantly, one hard save for checkpointing. But then when you pause, there are 2 options. There is restart checkpoint and restart encounter.
Oh, wow.
So not only can you go back to, and those are separate options, and it tells you exactly how long ago they were.
Love it.
1 minute. So there'll be times where it's previous checkpoint 10 minutes ago. Previous or start over, current encounter 1 minute ago. So if you get into something and it's gone wrong and you don't want to go back to the checkpoint, when you opened the area, you just want to start this fight over. The game knows that it has discrete fight encounters and those are separate from entering an area, and you can absolutely just start those over. And the loading times are really fast. I mean, I was playing on a pro and it was 10 seconds later and you're like, boom.
Who needs a PS5? I got it. Yeah, totally.
Exactly.
But like the thing there that's great is sometimes you would go through a segment in Last of Us Part 1 and go like, yo, I did not think it would be 3 fights in a row like this. I wish I had saved my stuff. I wish I could go back to the beginning of this entire section and hold on to my bot, whatever I don't even remember what the items were, shivs or whatever, through this first segment and just stealth through and then save them for the back. So I like that you get both of those options. That's good. That's really good. Rob, it looked like you were literally pointing.
No, I was just gonna say I like that the ability to save scum a little bit in this game did make it a lot more pleasant. Like there were places where you just don't want to fuck with all these zombies. You just don't feel like it. Yeah. And like once you stealth past like 3 or 4 of them, the thought of having that entire run just derailed because like the last one spotted you and now you got to fight all of them and it's just a whole like rigmarole. Nah, I don't want to do that. I don't need to repeat those steps because I know those steps. Like they aren't hard. It's just I don't want to do them again. Yeah. The ability to just be like, okay, before I do this next leg of the encounter, I'm going to pause here, save here. And in addition to being backed up by that really good checkpointing system, really did make it a pretty frictionless experience from that standpoint. But I think there's also like frictionlessness can be taken too far. And I think one of the other things about this is that this is such a game where it is tuned so that you are never at a loss for ideas for even a moment. Like, again, not just in terms of I know what beat's probably going to happen, but in terms of, okay, visually, these 2 roads diverge, but one of them, your eye is naturally led by a series of like lit textures to a point in the distance, and this other one just isn't as visually dynamic. You can go down it, but it won't go anywhere. Because the way you want to go,
you pick up pretty quickly. It's like, oh, there's too many vines over there. I'm good. There are no hidden objects over there. The game never hides anything over by too many vines. Like you end up being able to ignore whole sections because that's cool. Like they've already told me, like there's nothing happening over there.
Yeah, but then you become more aware of, oh, this is a hallway. Like it's a very cleverly disguised hallway, but also it's like, no, man, I'm going to the window that's like got the paint around it. Like there's big orange red paint all over that wall. That's the building I'm going to. Everything else here, it's like, slate gray. That ain't shit. I'm going to go to the one with the paint.
Yeah. Yeah. And then at that point, the artifice becomes revealed, which.
And geez, the puzzles in this game.
How many boxes do you push? How many ladders do you
not
lower?
That many. Actually, they clearly took that criticism to heart.
Levers?
But they love safes.
You still just
safes.
A lot of safes, and
you like lock picking, or are you cracking? Like, what's the? You're finding.
You're
codes.
looking around the environment for some numbers.
Nothing as bad, hopefully, as the Resident Evil 3 one, where it's just like numbers circled on a poster nearby.
Not that bad, but not that far off either. But I mean, it's the kind of thing where if you're in a room and you're like, "Where? I haven't found the solution. Maybe it's in the next room." It's not. It's not in the next room. You just need to look a little bit more in the room you're in. And it was really funny. There was one puzzle where because the solutions are almost always painstakingly obvious and right next to the safe that you're trying to open. There was one where the note that you read says, "Hey, the last digits to this combo are someone's phone number." And I turned around and there was a board that had a bunch of graphics, a bunch of like poster stuff, but only one of them was high res, and the only one that was high res had a phone number on it. And I'm like, cool, that's it. And it didn't work.
Whoa.
And I'm like messaging Rob. I'm like, is there a bug in this game? Did I find a glitch? Like, what is up? Yeah. It's like right behind me. That's the answer. And he's like, I sent him screenshots. I'm like, what's going on here? And then I sent, he didn't get back to me. He was probably busy playing the game. And then I looked in the bathroom that was, of course, right next to it. Right. And on the wall was another phone number.
Actually, your messages sent me into a bit of a panic because I don't think I ever saw that. I don't think I ever found that safe. And so the entire game, I was like, wait a second. How much farther ahead in this game is Patrick?
Oh my God.
And if he was there 3 days ago and I still haven't seen this fucking save.
Oh my God.
I'm fucked. Like, because obviously, like, you know, this is Chekhov's safe. Like, if there's a safe, you're gonna have to open it. So if Patrick found the safe,
what was in there?
The best part about it was I spent roughly 30, and you know, my time is so precious, like with the kids and my family, like, and I'm deciding to, you know, I haven't played a lot of games while I've been on break, but I was like, I really wanted to play this. I wanted to do this conversation, and I was looking forward to the game. And there's like 30 minutes on this fucking save, because once it went past 10 minutes, it was like, oh, too much time invested. Now I need to solve this save. I should have just left after a minute or two and been like, it's fine. There'll be another save. The game is not going to make me miss a crucial item because I couldn't find Stacy's fucking phone number to plug into this.
Well, also,
and of course, hold on. The best part was I opened the safe and I had all the items in. It was full.
You literally couldn't take anything. You literally couldn't. But you open that fucking safe, whoever's going to come behind you is going to be real thankful.
Yeah, that's true.
But I mean, that is kind of the thing, is like, if there's an obstacle, like the thing is right next to it. And it like, I knew what kind of game I was in for when very early on you get a list of door codes. It's a pretty long list.
Yeah, the West 2.
Yeah,
North
and
1.
so you might think like, okay, this is just world building, like only like one of these codes is what I need to unlock the next gate. By the end of that chapter, you will have used every single code.
God.
Like, the game gives you the reference sheet you will require to get through every single obstacle in the section.
Just happened to be in one of those outposts.
It's like old school copy protection, where you would have like a manual to, you know, like a computer game that required you to like, all right.
Oh, do you ever have the wheel?
Yeah, the wheel, like a code wheel. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
If you're gonna keep playing
Sierra
this game,
games, I think,
yes,
had that.
Totally.
So yeah, just
that's
utterly absurd.
Well, and that's why during that like the kind of openish Seattle sequence, there is a moment where you come across and then kind of like the open area where you have the horse. You know, you've got this map, and as you come across, the game is making sure to call out buildings you should ignore and buildings that might have a curiosity. So it's like when you walk by something, Ellie will say something, mark it on her map, and it'll be a question mark. So you know that you can kind of explore, come back, and then, you know, go through all the things that might be meaningful. As I was doing that, like, initial sort of walkthrough, I find just a locked door, and the door is just locked. And then Ellie goes, "Oh, that's curious." Now, on one hand, I'm like, seems like you could just fucking bust this door open. Like, doesn't seem like we need to be like constrained by this lock. Could I shoot it? But, you know, whatever. But I was like, that key has to be like right here, because that's how these games work. This key is around the corner. And so I'm going around and around and around. No indication. I'm taking one of the new mechanics in part 2 is that you can break open like glass windows. And so there'll be maybe storefronts that there's no easy way in. Like the door is barricaded, but you could, like, you know, use your knife or a brick, bust open a door, and you can jump in. And so I'm looking for I'm going across the map, finding bricks and bottles, and because there was a certain spot in that area that you could collect a couple of them, throwing them at the windows connected to this area, and of course they don't break, like, because you're not meant to break those. And so I'm sort of losing it. I'm like, every puzzle has the solution within 5 feet. So what's going on? I finally just gave up, and I was like, I'll just come back here, I guess. And then, of course, at a completely random other spot of the map, you go into a bathroom, and there's just a key that says, like, this is a funny looking key. I wonder if this goes somewhere else on the map. And, like, on some level, I was glad that it was somewhere else, like, meaningfully away.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it was like, it also felt completely forced. Like, the game is just really struggles with how much hand-holding it wants to do, to a degree that it ends up hurting itself, and just not trusting the player enough to do their own, you know, sort of puzzle solving.
For what it's worth, I thought you were going somewhere else with that, which was, and then 20 minutes later, the door unlocked because enemies had to come through it. And then the area that I could see would be chest high cover, shooting gallery became a chest high cover, shooting gallery, or we had to run through there. And it reminds me that one of my biggest takeaways, or one of my biggest problems with the original Last of Us was the degree to which, do you ever watch cartoons when you were a kid and before there's an establishing shot and then something is about to happen and you see what the gag is because part of the screen is a different color than the rest of the screen? It's like, oh wait, that's the object that Tom is about to pick up and try to hit Jerry with because it looks like it's different than the wall behind it. Like, or this is the door that's going to open because it's not the same like rotating thing. And The Last of Us Part 1 was filled with that for me. It was like, oh yeah, this is where I'm going to have a gunfight. Here is where I have to get a sniper rifle. Here is where this, I'm going to lose access to all of my equipment because I'm going to fall into the water or whatever it is. It's what Rob was saying earlier about the kind of the way it would telegraph certain things. Did you find that with the combat stuff, or like that the transition between exploration into combat, or is that a smoother process this time?
There are Rob? There's like a couple. There are sequences where you are in an area where you're freely exploring, and then it's hard to tell if like a patrol just like happened to walk over by you, or the game realizes like, hey, we're going to let you explore this little area and then we're going to trigger a patrol to come regardless. It must be that there's not much in this game that is outright dynamic and would actually, the game would really benefit from like, it's a game about being no tension.
Scared. Yeah, exactly. Narratively, you're supposed to be scared all the time.
And it would really benefit from having laid out combat sequences where like, hey, we're putting these enemies in specific spots because we think it's unique and you're going to have to do something different in order to accomplish it, or they have a certain idea. But it would just generally benefit from almost all the time, just having random things show up just to kind of fuck with you, because otherwise you just get into this routine where you just loot, here's another building, like time to go find the 6 things to loot. And other than, as like Rob alluded to, like the jump sequence that like will come every once in a while when you open a door, there is never a time where it's like, I've spent a little too much time checking out this record store,
right,
and now 6 infected have showed up because I spent too much time, when that would make all the sense in the world for there to be herds of infected or even just all these patrols, because the faction you're going up with in the first third of the game, I don't know, first 6th of the game, based on the way Rob's talking about it, is everywhere. They're omnipresent. Like you should be running into them all the time. And it just doesn't feel that way. And it's because they want this very discrete explore, combat. But I think the game would really benefit from pressing you back into those, or saying, fuck it, I'm going to stop exploring this area, or I'm going to come back and hopefully that, herd will have gone away, which is actually something Days Gone, a game I did not like particularly much, was gesturing toward that in like the horde mechanic that they had with like, dozens of, like they were working towards trying to solve that problem in a different way, and it didn't work. But The Last of Us could have benefited from that quite a bit, I think.
I think, see, for me, like so much of this just feels like issues with Naughty Dog's philosophy just all coming home to roost. Much as they do for some of the characters in this game, right? These are things long in the making that are starting to land. I think one of the things that made Naughty Dog's action games popular is that I loved the Uncharted games. Loved Uncharted 2, playing that was one of my best experiences of that generation. Mm-hmm. And I think a big part of that was the thing they did uncannily well was give you the feeling of actually being the character in like a big summer blockbuster adventure.
You're just going to somehow slip away and dodge that bullet and make it around the corner.
And the thing that works because it is a summer action adventure. Like, so it feels right that Nathan Drake just gets out of that collapsing building by the skin of his teeth and equips on his way out. That feels right. You're like, yeah, like your hand was held through it, but it feels so good to go through that sequence in one go, just see it all unfolding around you, escape it, and you're like, damn, I did that. Like that ruled. That was cool. It begins to fall apart when the vibe is The Last of Us and is trying to at least evoke more of a survival game, right? This is more of it is a hostile world. You are a vulnerable actor in it. And when the game is constantly trying to make it so that, don't worry, you'll be fine here. You know what the score is. You are fighting against that, but it is what Naughty Dog has tended to do. Some of the decisions they make here, like, I don't remember there being like audio cues to let you know when an area had been completely cleared. I don't remember there being like
they remark every single time. Whenever you are, I want to say every single time you hit a discrete
the body
encounter,
will still be hitting the floor.
And then like Ellie or a character you're with will remark, I think that's all of them.
Right.
And then you go, cool, time, it's looting time.
Nom, nom, nom.
Which just removes all put this duct tape in my mouth. It removes all tension. And it's not the kind of tension that it's going for, which is take a big sigh of relief. Instead it's cool. All right, time to switch to the other phase
binary.
of the game.
Right.
Yeah, it's binary in a way that you never feel like you're going to go around a corner and you fucked up. Or again, like we said, you spend too much time in a room. It's always just when the danger is going to arrive, or when you don't know it, it's because you're in a cutscene and they can control the camera and it's a specially timed jump scare or what have you.
Contrast this with like the Mr. X stuff in the Resident Evil 2 remake with Stalker
yes,
games.
This needs some Mr. X energy for sure.
Even that most recent Metro game, which I don't think any of us loved, had moments where you were like, oh shit, I thought I cleared this place. I did not. Someone is rolling up on me, right? Like, there are other models.
I think, like, yes, the intervening years, I don't think have been kind to the Last of Us in some ways, because Resident Evil 2 is a game that occurred to me many times throughout this, where I was like, oh, I just played a way better version of this. Like, it controls better, it is more convincing in its suspense.
Right. It systematizes it.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, exactly. In terms of exploring the world, I was like, I should go back to Dying Light, which is a thing I think probably once every 3 years. And I get to the same place in Dying Light, and I'm like, I suck at Dying Light. I hate this. But nevertheless,
that game does that shit. That game totally does that shit. Yeah.
Right. No, when Dying Light is like, hey, do you think you can make this run across the city through this like perilous, this perilous path that you have found, right? Like, your route, you've scouted it. It is yours. Like, you could go other ways. But you have your preferred, you have your landmarks and all that. Like, that game now exists too. And so when The Last of Us is trying to evoke it, well, we have to get through, this neighborhood. It's pretty treacherous. It's like, man, it's a hallway. It's not even as complicated as Ravenholm was, 15 years ago. And so I think it does begin to just grate a little bit, because after a point, the gap between what the game is trying to suggest and then all the ways it so patently is not that, just in terms of how it is designed, just keeps getting wider. And because this game is interminable, you have plenty of time to internalize all its logic. And so even if you're a little rusty on The Last of Us, by the time you hit what you hope will be its last act, pretty much everything that it's doing.
Right.
And there I wish there were more. There's a combat sequence, maybe 6 hours into the game. My guess is you'll remember this one, Rob, where you're sort of in an underground. It's one of the first ones where you have infected and human enemies together, and there's a big red light in the back of the room. It's kind of in a subway. It's striking. Like, it looks like to describe it as like it is mostly it's complete darkness. And then there is just this overpowering red subway light in this area. And you just can't see. And you can't turn on your flashlight because now there are human enemies. In the Last of Us world, the infected respond to sound and not to visual stimuli. So you can have a flashlight on right in front of them and they're not going to do anything so long as you don't sort of attract their attention. But you can't have that on because there are humans around. And this red light is just blinding. It actually has it evoked sort of like some of the best visual images in Control, where it can use colored lighting in really striking dynamic ways. And it made the encounter itself was nothing special, right? It's just, here's a handful, three enemy types, two different types of infected, and humans with different weapons. But it was using the aesthetic in a way that like was so uncomfortable and so oppressive that it made the whole character of the fight feel fundamentally different. And it just doesn't do that very often, or at least that's not been my experience.
Yeah, no, that fight is like, it's so lurid that the entire thing has a hallucinatory quality. Like, yes. And what you're supposed to do, pretty fucking obvious. There's dudes hunting you, there's zombies
Throw
nearby,
a bottle
and
then let the infected fuck up those humans. And it's still satisfying. Right. It's still great.
Yeah, you're like, I'll bet this will be awesome. And it is. But like it is really cool that like you are running around there and the dust motes are being so blown out by this, like they're catching the red light.
Yeah.
That like it's just shadows emerging from this like pool of red. And you will like run headlong into enemies and just brush right past each other because like nobody can see shit. It's really cool. But yeah, there's one other sequence like that. And then by and large, it is, again, like, go through this drab building. See how it treats you.
Right. I think I'd be remiss not to bring up or ask questions about, to the degree that you're allowed to talk about it, the kind of queer content in the game, right? Ellie is a lesbian, or at least as far as I know, based on previous game stuff. We know that she has a partner in this game, or that's a key component of it. I don't know how much you can talk about that stuff. Or the ways in which that relationship is depicted, whether or not you think that it's well written or well acted or important to the story, etc. But I'm certainly curious to know what your thoughts are there.
Well, I think it's really heartening to see that we can have a game where queer characters can be as violent and just utterly loathsome as traditional masculine heroes.
Happy Pride, everybody.
We did it.
This is representation.
Like, no, I think, so the relationship stuff is well acted. It's well handled. If you want a taste of how good it is, it's in trailers that have already been out for this game for a year. Like that stuff. Some of the most pivotal
It's a lot
scenes,
more of that. Like
right.
the bits between Ellie and Dina are they're good. There's some of the like there's a sequence with a guitar that is like really, really striking and powerful. But I don't know. You've finished the game. You know, it feels like this is maybe something where probably best suited for. We can actually talk about
a week
happens.
2 take, not a week -1 take.
I do think. I think my
there is a thing that just happened in my game. I'm trying to like wink and nod at Rob.
So my 10,000 foot view of this is, at times it feels like this is a game that, while it does seem to wish to be inclusive, there is also an element of laundering some of its violence and content through queerness. And like there are times I'm playing this and I'm like, it feels like one of the motifs in the Last of Us series is that a lot can be forgiven if you're just mentoring a young queer child while you just fucking murk people right and left. That is one of the through lines of The Last of Us, and I think it kind of continues to hold here too.
Fuck. God, we've gone pretty deep here. We've gone. Hey, guess what? It's the last day of E3, everybody, and we're here at 11 p.m. doing hour 7 of podcasting. We did it anyway. We didn't go, but we did it anyway.
It happened.
I guess I am curious, just at a high level. I can't quite tell if what you think about this thing. Your one word to Emmanuel was more, but because I'm me, I want more than one word. Like, Rob, you've beaten this game now.
Yeah.
Are you satisfied? Are you disappointed? Are you frustrated? What is if you had another word, if you had another sentence, if you could tell me, what's the tone of your review? I mean, we've had this conversation, but I haven't felt the synthesis.
Yeah. I am trying to I'm still working out like how annoyed I am, but not annoyed even. Like, I found this game to be repulsive in a lot of ways. And while there's a great deal of craft to it, there's nothing new that I haven't seen before. And so from that standpoint of like, not that every game needs to reinvent the wheel, but just I've seen all of this before multiple times.
Is this the game from the way Naughty Dog builds their productions, where the gap between the quality of sort of like the quote unquote production values and the content that is presented within those production values is the widest?
Oof.
I think that
I'm not saying I haven't gotten far enough in the game to like make that. I'm more presenting that as like a way of thinking through like it is the slickest, like most technically proficient game they have ever made, and that will always continue to be the case with Naughty Dog. You know,
yeah, I think, but I think some of it is, but it's not anymore because this game feels like the studio is kind of like stuck. Like games have changed since The Last of Us 1 came out. This game didn't. This studio didn't. And so part of it is like, by the standards of 2013, this game is best in class. But we are a full 7 years on from that. Like, we've seen multiple games come in and do things in a similar vein and do them better. And in some ways, it feels like an oddly solipsistic experience. Like, this is a game that hasn't looked at anything else that's happening. This is a game that knew what it knew back when they made The Last of Us 1 and does not seem to have learned anything about like creating a game or telling a story. And the thing that you get as a member of the audience as you go through all this is, I think this is ultimately a very vapid game in a lot of ways. And it's hard to say that because there are so many good beats. Like, Naughty Dog still has great beats and there are great performances, right? It sucks to be saying that like all of these great performances from the cast are in the service of just fucking nothing. But I think they're in service of nothing. Like, every single thing that this game sets up that's going to land like a ton of bricks on your chest, every single painful moment, every tragic twist. This game wants to be a tragedy. Not only can you see it coming, but it doesn't even really carry itself off that well. And so what does it do is it just goes for the most grotesque, spectacularly violent, and morally horrifying thing that could happen. That's what will always happen in this game. And there is a point where I was basically, I knew I was fucking done. Late in the game, there is a sequence that, if I were to describe it, it wouldn't even make sense to you because it's totally out of context for everything we've talked about. But you're in this like real like charnel house of horrors type situation, and just screaming over the like radio that is playing in the world is just blasting over the radio, like distortion volumes, is the Black Angels' first Vietnamese War. Do you know where that song was used, like really front and center, to really set the tone for a game?
I do not.
Spec Ops: The Line.
Ah.
And the minute I heard that, I was like, that's where we're at. Like,
right.
Like, this is it. This is what... And I like Spec Ops: The Line. I don't think it was quite as deep as
our friend, our good friend,
I do. But I think when I heard that music cue, I was like, we're just back here. We're just doing this again. Where it's like, oh man, how could you drop white phosphorus on all those people? And it's like, yeah, I got it.
The player is implicated.
I'm the real monster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also briefly, the player is implicated here, but not necessarily in the way that the game might make you think, right? Let's not forget for a moment that like Naughty Dog and Sony brushed off allegations about sexual harassment, saying that in fact there was no such complaint on file. You can go back and read that story from 2017, I want to say. And then only a couple of months ago, we heard again through Jason Schreier's reporting about the degree of crunch on this project. If the player is implicit, it is not only in, and this is not even me, we do not have the time to unpack the degrees in which we are all complicit in ongoing problems in the world we live in, because there are too many to count. But in this particular moment, we should not forget that this is a studio that has not tried, as far as reporting has shown, to seriously reform its labor practices, to make an environment that is safe or that is non-exploitative. This game is going to make incredible amounts of money for this company. And yet their employees are continued to be pushed to the very breaking edge, which is deeply ironic for me, because can I give you some lore? This is some deep, real lore. Do you know the tweet? Do you know the Austin Walker tweet of all tweets is, "Do you ever see a take so bad?" Mm-hmm. That tweet is about a bad Last of Us take. One of the worst Last of Us takes I've ever seen. I'm not going to say who said it. It's not even on Twitter anymore, but I will share it with you. My fear is that The Last of Us 2 is getting made not because the principals of Naughty Dog need more money, but that they're doing it for the staff. Their thought is, this will make enough money to really take care of everyone who works here for years and years to come. And there was a follow-up tweet to that was basically like, here it is. Their thought is, we should burn down our greatest achievement to help Julie in accounts receivable put her kids through college. Well, I disagree. This is someone who is very mad at the idea of there being a Last of Us 2, someone in the game development field, by the fucking way. And I was just floored. Ironically, all of the time, Naughty Dog's management was such that, in fact, no, this was not a game done so that they could treat their employees better. This was a game being made in spite of how their employees would be treated to make it. And it is super frustrating to me because, there's no version of this conversation that ever ends with us going, but it's such good art that it was worth it. But on top of that not being a possibility, what you've told me is you're not even moved to even think about making that argument, that in fact, it's just another one. And I think that's about as damning as you said more as in it's more of the same Last of Us, but also it sounds like what you're saying is, yeah, it's more of everything that's around us. It's more of the last 7 years. It's more of what's come before. And that's, again, I think as harsh as a critique as you can give to something this, with such high expectations. Though maybe if our expectations for it were lower, the response would be lower. I don't know, or it'd be different. Sorry for dumping that take on you. It's a rough one. Any final thoughts here before we wrap up? I know it's very late. Thank you both for and Cado also for staying up so late.
Oh, it's Rob. I can't wait to play the next 25 hours.
Rob is
you are in for a treat, my friend. I do not even think you've seen the tip of the iceberg.
No, Well, where I can tell I'm at in the story is about where I'm probably going to get a sense of that iceberg, and then what you're telling me is no, I'm not. So,
God,
I mean, yeah, I'm not playing it through because I want, I feel like these games in particular are, however we feel about them, so profoundly influential. And as we think, we did the PS5 stuff. This is part of a house style. These games are not going away. No. These types of games are not going away. They are like part and parcel with the types of games that Sony makes. Not all tonally like this, but that is what the company specializes in, and they're extremely popular.
Yeah.
Well, they're extremely popular,
yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, the amount of people who consider The Last of Us to be their favorite game ever made is like widespread, and especially amongst folks that I know that are, not into video games. They play video games, but they play a handful, and The Last of Us is really, really well regarded. And so, yeah, I find I will see this through the end, despite the fact that my expectations have been lowered, just because I think it's difficult to understand where games like this are going without understanding sort of like what the pop culture is that the majority of those people are taking in, because it ends up informing what comes out.
Yeah. Rob, any final thoughts?
This is really not to the point about the overall quality of The Last of Us, but I do have to say, it strikes me every time I play a Naughty Dog game. Their sound mixes are just the best in the goddamn industry, though. A lot of surround mixes can be a little bit iffy, and they don't pan quite well, and they don't activate the rears as much. The sense of presence you get from from the way these games are set up and how they sound is truly incredible. I wish that more games were like a spectacle on that front. I don't know how Naughty Dog so consistently nails that part. And a lot of other, even major releases don't. So I will say that even though there are many parts of this game that I found just unbearable, there were places where the technical prowess on display was incredible. I would just love to see that put in the service of better projects.
The sound in general is just really good. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I had heard that the original Last of Us was planned originally with the idea of, instead of using, when you focus listening, it would be, you wouldn't get outlines. It was all about actually just boosting the sound because somebody there really is into surround sound systems, but then they scrapped it because how many people have surround sound systems or even surround headsets? So
presumably that must play into some of the accessibility stuff, because haven't they made the argument that you can be more or less completely blind and play through the majority of this game?
Yeah.
So I presume that must be related to their sound design.
God. Okay. Well, we've made it past 11 p.m. We've made it to the end of the night here on the East Coast anyway. Patrick, thank you again so much for swinging by for this very extra long episode. How much did you tell me off mic, I guess, what your timetable looks like?
I believe June 24th.
Wow, that's soon.
When I'm back.
Well, I hope you enjoy the remainder.
Emergence Day.
Hey man, I liked the first 10 hours of Gears Tactics and then played another 20 hours because it was there.
I guess quick shout outs. Is there anything else you played that you want to shout out? Is it?
Nah, we'll do that another time. We can do I barely paid attention to game news for
Classic.
the past. Good. We should do an episode where I ask you questions.
I love it.
And you can explain to me what Valorant and other things are.
Yeah, I can talk to you about Valorant. I can talk to you about the Order 1886. Which, by the way, Rob, better or worse than Last of Us Part 2?
Oh, the Order just puts Last of Us 2 in the ground. Okay. Oh my god, I would I'm gonna reinstall the motherfucker right now.
I'm sorry I fed you to the
Bringing
wolves,
back Waypoint 101. Everyone
hey, listen,
Order.
I'm already halfway through it. Shit.
Do you think they're gonna add a boost mode to the Order on the
PS5? Yeah.
Is that going to be one of the games that gets a frame rate kick?
Though they're going to remove the bars. They're going to remember the whole thing with that game when it came out was it was 16 by 9. It was not just widescreen. It was not 16 by 9 because it was even cropped in, right? It was extra super wide because they added bars to the top and the bottom, and the people were mad about it.
Was that during gameplay?
It was all the time, 100%.
So that's like the Evil Within did the same thing, even though the Evil Within clearly did it because of performance.
That is 100% why they do it here too. I don't hate it. Anyway, we'll talk about that on Monday, Rob, because I'll probably beat that over the weekend, and then we'll have some talk. But until then, you can find me on Twitter at Austin_Walker. You can find Waypoint, waypoint.vice.com, twitter.com/Waypoint. Rob, where can people find you? And your review will be up by the time this is up, presumably.
Yeah.
Okay. Rob Zachney.
Rob Zachney.
Sorry,
yeah.
A little. We're not in LA, but LA is in us right now. Patrick.
You can find me at Patrick Klepek. Oh, and I'd be remiss not to mention that my wife and I, our horror podcast that will probably almost assuredly stop after we don't have this extra free time. We're trying to remain positive, but if we're being realistic. But we did watch Perfect Blue, the horror anime that Austin
Satoshi Kon joint. Yeah.
Yeah. I really pushed pushed my wife out of her comfort zone to watch that one.
Yeah.
So but we ended up both enjoying it.
Okay.
So you can, that's our podcast, Till Death Do Us Part. You can find that on iTunes.
You should watch the rest of everything Satoshi Kon does. Not all of it's horror, but
yeah,
all
no,
of it's
I want to
fantastic.
watch. Look, my wife came out of that saying, I am open to the
possibility.
The opening bits of that movie, Perfect Blue, where it's just the most anime ass shit with the crowd talking. I was cringing into my chair. I was like, I fucked up. She's never gonna ever watch another one of these goddamn movies again. And fortunately, it got really good about halfway through.
It gets really good.
Enjoyed it.
I saw Tokyo Godfathers in the theater literally right before Corona shut everything down. Like one of the last things I got to do, and that movie was fantastic to see in a theater. Especially with the new voice cast.
I've never been able to forgive Perfect Blue for pulling the, oh no, this is really fucked up. Oh wait, it's a movie shoot. And it's like, motherfucker, that had edits. Eat shit.
Yeah. That was just not, I don't love that sequence. That sequence sucks. I guess, yes. Content warning, if you go watch Perfect Blue for sexual assault.
Whoops.
Anyway, most of Satoshi Kon's stuff does not include sexual assault and is all very good. Please watch Patrick. It's one of the best anime of all time.
That's next on the list for me.
And people find Patrick at Patrick Klepek. I think you may have said that. I don't remember.
I hope this ends with Kate becoming a weeb.
Oh, it'd be so. Your kid, both of his kids are definitely going to be huge.
I'm ready for it.
Cosplaying,
from princess to weeb
conventions.
is the arc.
Oh God, Cado, where can people find you on Twitter?
At _Cado_Pierce.
Also, please,
Destiny.
Everyone. Thank Cado.
dedicated.
Oh, Destiny. We have to talk about Destiny on Monday. We'll talk about Destiny.
No, I'm not going to be here.
Oh, fuck. Cado, you have 1 minute.
We'll catch up later. New shit happened. They announced like 3 expansions.
Well, that's all we have time for.
No, let Cado speak.
New shit happened. Well, here's your long-awaited Destiny update. Here's Luke Smith. Luke, what have you got in Destiny for us now? New shit. Actually, some of the shit's going away in a vault, though. But there is new shit.
They made the Disney vault, but for video game content. When I come back, we will talk about this next Friday.
Okay, next Friday.
A week from when you're hearing this.
Good.
We'll talk about it.
Some of the stuff sounds
Is the state of Destiny strong, Cado?
For at least another week, I think. We'll see.
We'll see.
Never been a better time to get back in Destiny.
Will the levies hold?
Before it's gone, folks.
Where are you going to be Friday? I don't know. Be careful. Holy shit. Anyway.
These classic Nightfalls won't be around for long. They're going to go back in the vault to be reworked.
Oh my God. All right. With all of that said, thank you as always for listening to this extra long podcast. We'll be back next week for more. Cado, I hope you have a good vacation. Everyone wish Cado a good vacation, and thank Cado for also staying up late with us today and also producing this very late or very early tomorrow. So thank you, Cado.
Both. It'll be both.
It'll be both. Yeah, fair. All right. As always, thank you to Bowen for letting us use the track Miss You off the EP Pale Machine. Find out more about that at waypoint.zone/BOEN. And as always, fuck capitalism. Go home and then hit the streets and raise some fucking hell as we continue to protest for justice in this shitty world. Until next week, peace.